Good day, everyone. My name is Joe Doherty. I'm the Director of Test Development at CX University. Myself and CXU welcomes you to the webinar, Show Me the Numbers, Bridging the Gap Between CX Measurement and Real Financial Outcomes. Each of you have joined the webinar in listen-only mode. As you know, CXU is leading the way in customer experience training. And we hope today's presentation inspires you to discover additional learning opportunities available from CXU. The webinar is slated to last approximately 30 minutes. However, you're encouraged to submit any questions you have during the webinar in the text box found on the side panel. Scott McCallister, whose bio you see on the screen, will be responding to them during the question and answer session following the webinar. At the end of the webinar, also, upon your exit, we will ask for your responses to a short feedback survey. This is a necessary element for all organizations, small and large, including CX University, who wish to seek an improvement in their customer experiences. Finally, a webinar recording, including the slide presentation, will be sent to you using the email you used for registration. It'll be sent approximately 3 hours following the webinar, so you might want to look for that as well. Again, if you have any questions, please submit them in the question and answer box on the panel, question box on the panel, and we'll get to them at the end of the webinar. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our Vice President of Consulting, Scott McCallister.
Thank you, Joe, for the introduction, and welcome everybody to today's webinar. I'm guessing that almost all of you have been told that CX practitioners need to connect their programs to the financial outcomes for their businesses. Unfortunately, the thought leaders and consultants in the industry have not been very specific about how to do that. To fill this gap, the founder of CX University, Mohammed Latib, asked me to start a consulting practice to address this area. Over the next several months, we will be having a series of webinars and presentations and publications on this important topic. Today, I'm going to discuss why you need a business case and what the key elements that it can need to be to make a good pitch to your chief financial officer. The next webinar will get into some depth on 3 approaches you can take to deliver on that analysis. So for now, let me start with today's presentation. What I would like you to take away today are 3 main points. First of all, you should be worried that customer experience could become a fad if too few practitioners make a strong business case. I'm also going to give you my view on published research studies and say that they're interesting and hopefully convince you that the CFO needs more than that. I will also hope you take away 5 key elements for a winning customer experience business case. The agenda is in those 3 parts. Could it become a fad? I'm going to talk about the analyses of the big name research firms, and I'll discuss the key elements of the business case that I think you need to put together. Now, the first question is, really, should we be worried that it could become a fad? Because things are going great. Customer focus is very intuitive. It touches everything and has a lot of enthusiastic evangelists in the industry. In addition, some companies really have wholly committed to customer experience efforts already and are very active. And finally, really you could ask is, could customer experience become a fad if it's already been around for 15 years? Well, my view is that most business fads seem smart at the time, but then do fade away. Now, what I mean by a fad are we all have our own list. Mine includes total quality management was a fad many years ago when Japan was accelerating its competitiveness in operations. That gave way to business process reengineering, another big effort in operations. And now everybody said, oh no, the real thing to do is Six Sigma, which even today some people are saying are starting to show signs of being a fad. Core competence, I would also submit, is an area that was being used to evaluate personnel in corporations, but when they really got into it, it was complex, and it too has stopped becoming a part of business performance review. And matrix management was another one I thought of, where its complexity probably caused it to fade away. But basically, most fads, and the ones you think about, started with great enthusiasm. Things were growing great, but then they disappeared. The reasons they disappeared, there are quite a few. Many just under-deliver. Some prove too expensive to execute. Others get a new leader, and that leader doesn't support it as they might normally. And those others lose out to cost-cutting pressures. There's a whole variety of reasons they go away. But what I would submit is the things that don't go away are the programs that have a strong business case. Those get funded consistently. Now, when you think about customer experience, it's hard. It requires cultural change. And also, when you execute it, there's complexities in dealing with the different business functions within the company to all come together. And in general, it's disruptive. But I would submit that if you can prove your business case with hard numbers, the chief financial officer and the whole executive suite will want to continue investing in your customer experience programs. Now, let me discuss some of the big name research firms and what they're doing that might contribute to a business case from their point of view. I'm going to spend some time on this slide because it's an example of how some of the thought leaders in the industry are trying to connect CX metrics to high-level financial results and using that to support a business case. This slide comes from Forrester, a recent report of theirs, and it's just an example that I think is typical. What they're doing with this analysis is they're focusing on their CX index. Now, what that is it's a proprietary analysis done with customer surveys where they ask a series of questions, and the answers to those questions are aggregated into a single rating of a CX index. And what Forrester has put together is an analysis by industry, and they do it for multiple industries. On this slide, I've just shown the first two of their long list of industries. And they did an analysis that said that if you increase your CX index by 1 percentage point, you can expect an average revenue per customer to go up by a certain dollar amount. And on the slide you see for auto manufacturers, they're saying that 1 percentage point increase in the CX index will allow you to get an extra $48.50 per customer. And then in the spirit of a business case, they multiply that by the next column, the average number of customers in a company. This is one of the big players in the auto manufacturer market. And that extends out to $873 million for every 1% increase in the CX index. The key to this is whether you believe you could use for your business, your business case, the number for this for the industry that you're in, that 4850. And to make a judgment on that, you really need to say, where does that come about? Well, what they've done is they've done an extensive set of surveys, and you can see the number of surveys in the footnote, of consumers that have interacted or bought something from different brands in the auto manufacturers industry. The end of the survey, they've turned into an index, so now they have an index for each of those brands. The other data point is they can get reported financial results, revenues for those brands, and divide them by their estimated number of customers to get revenue per customer. What they've effectively done is made a correlation between those two, and they found a positive correlation, i.e., as the CX index is higher, you also find higher revenue per customer for those brands. And they've established a linear relationship that allows them to come up with the particular dollar per customer that you see on the chart. Now that's really an interesting number and very encouraging, but they promptly point out that maybe not everybody can use this number. And if you read the footnotes, which I've included down here, first of all, it's the largest brands in the industry that they used in their analysis, and they're, you know, that's not hundreds. That's maybe a dozen companies. I'm not sure. That are the data points that they're using for this correlation. And they also properly note that for brands that don't have a linear relationship between the customer experience index and revenue, the revenue effect might be very different. So they're warning you that, you know, against explicitly using this number. And that's totally appropriate. It's probably the best they can do with published information on revenues and revenue per customer. But in terms of a business case, there's a real issue, and that is correlation doesn't necessarily translate into causation. And on this slide, if you just look at the two lines, the red and the black lines, you see over time they seem to move together. They seem to be correlated. And that's sort of interesting until you you know, kind of laugh as I did and see what the lines represent. And the red line is worldwide non-commercial space launches, and the black line is sociology doctorates awarded. And I think we'd all agree that it's unlikely that you have causation between when the sociology doctorates go up and down. That's what's driving non-commercial space launches. So correlation may not be causation, and you really need to dig into that issue. Now, what are the other things, the other causal factors that you have to look out for in these sort of analyses? And honestly, I don't see the big name research firms addressing those alternative factors. I put them into two buckets here: internal factors versus external factors. So what I'm saying is, if your customer experience measure that you're using, it may be CX index, it may be net promoter score, but if that goes up and you see revenues go up or revenue per customer goes up, is that the cause, or could it be that the ones with the companies that have the higher revenue per customer and the higher CX indexes really have superior products, and it's the superior products or pricing that is the underlying cause for most of it. Not that CX isn't part of it, but maybe it's not the major thing. Marketing, actually another internal group that has programs and is doing investments and expenditures to benefit the company. They come up with a breakthrough marketing program. They may want to lay claim to the increased revenue per customer or revenue growth. I've listed other internal factors there. The product groups might be wanting to make a claim, but let's not forget the external factors, and that can go either way. Perhaps the revenue benefit of a particular company was due to a blunder by a different competitor, and that competitor's customers came over to the other company. It could work the other way. A competitor could do innovations. They could have a superior financial performance despite all the great things that you did with your customer experience activities. So you got to look out for these alternative causation factors, and that is really not an easy thing to do. I'm going to give you one other example of how some major research firms look at analyses that they hope you will use to make a business case. And in this case, it happens to be the Walker Institute looking at the Net Promoter Score. But there are, again, a lot of instances where they talk about people that have a low customer experience metrics, and they compare them to the financials of some companies, some customers with a high score. I'm going to assume you all know what the Net Promoter Score is, because that's really one of the major metrics in the customer experience industry. In this chart, what they did is they took the spend volume, which is again revenue per customer really, and they said that the customers that gave 0, extreme detractors, had one spending level, and they compared that to the customers that gave a 10. And they discovered, this is indexed, that it was 33% higher revenue per customer for the extreme promoters. Now, again, that's an interesting number. I would call it a benchmark, but in terms of a business case, you really can't use the 33%. The trick is to come up with a credible assumption or plan in your business case for how much of this gap that you can close. Can you get it halfway, whatever. So knowing this is very interesting and actually can put some boundaries on assumptions you might want to make in your business case, but there's still a lot more you need to do to apply it. The second issue that I will raise is, again, causality. There is a question as to whether if you apply your customer experience efforts to these extreme detractors, and let's say you do some great things and they're able to get them up, a lot of them up to just giving an NPS score of a 10. Will that really drive the revenue per customer? There might be a case that those people just don't have that need for that many of your products, or their income prohibits it getting that high. There may be a lot of reasons why they can't get up very far toward that 33% higher average. So there's a couple of issues before you use these published analyses for your business case that I think you have to consider. And another point is that those are statistics for other companies. Your chief financial officer will probably know that your results might be very different. On thinking of the Forrester that does things by industry, the researcher statistics may not include your industry, so you really probably couldn't use the other industry. The CFO might also say, but even if we're in that industry, there's multiple business models within the industry, and his company might not be the same as the business segments that are being measured by the research analysis. Another level is that those are major competitors that tend to dominate the statistics. However, what works for a major competitor may not work for your company in your position in your industry. And finally, you may not do all this customer initiatives, the customer experience initiatives that they did. And they may be different, and therefore the results would be different than the studied companies. So the bottom line is to make a convincing business case to your chief financial officer, you need to have a story that needs your company's actions for your products in your markets, which means that you can get limited benefit out of a lot of the published research about connecting customer experience metrics to financial outcomes. I want to make one more point about a lot of these statistics and metrics. They're mostly coming from customer survey results, which have inherent problems. Now, customer survey responses are almost always a small sample. The respondents are a few % of the requests for responses that you put out, and in an even smaller case, smaller % of all the transactions that are going on. And also for a particular time period, let's say it's in a quarter or a month, do you even have enough survey responses to be statistically significant, i.e. Market researcher would tell you that if it's not statistically significant, you shouldn't rely on what the numbers are telling you. So the sample size is an issue, but I would say even more important are that the respondents are not necessarily representative. I think many research will tell you that the motivated customer experience respondents are the ones that give you high or low end of the rating scale. They're so enthusiastic, they're willing to spend some extra time to fill out the survey, or they have such big problems that they would want to tell somebody about it and give their feedback. What about all the people that are in the middle that are less likely to respond to the survey? There's another issue as well as of representation. A lot of these surveys today are now done purely online. And again, market researchers know that online survey respondents do not necessarily represent the overall market of people that don't respond to those surveys. And it's very difficult for people to come up with a way to adjust the online survey responses to match the whole market to get that picture. So you have to be skeptical about the picture. And finally, there's a question of whether the respondents are the customers that are moving the financial needle. And what I mean for that is if you're tracking a customer experience metrics and it goes up, and then you happen to say, well, yes, my revenue per customer goes up. Perhaps the revenue per customer for the respondents weren't the reason the overall revenues went up. Perhaps the financial needle was moved by the customers that didn't respond to the survey. So you're not really understanding what those people that are giving you the financial benefits, what's really driving them. And now for my final section here, I want to describe what I believe are the key elements for a strong customer experience business case. Most people focus on what I call key performance indicators of financial outcomes, and almost every article lists them. Revenue growth, customer retention, referrals, revenue per customer, things that have to do with costs, inbound contacts per customer. But those are pieces of the puzzle of a business case. They're dealing with different issues, and a business case has to pull them all together. And what I actually find interesting as I've reviewed what's published in the industry is almost nobody talks about incremental profit. But from a business case point of view, that really is the key number that you need to get to. It pulls all of this stuff together and summarizes in a useful way to make a financial business case. And so here's my list of the key elements that I think you need for the business case. First of all, most people spend most of their time on understanding what CX actions people have taken, and that's all very important. But what you need is you have to say, what CX action have we taken? What causation do I have? How did that cause specific customer behavior changes? And how does that then translate into increased dollar profits compared with no customer experience action? And that's what's known as incremental return and a return on investment measure. So it's the increased dollar profits is the important but difficult to get to measure that you really need to include. And then obviously you need the investment, and that is what the amount of money that needs to be paid back in one-time dollar costs to implement CX, the particular initiatives you did. So the return on investment is the incremental return and the investment, and you have to have both of those components quantified. Now, when you make your business case initially, you're making forecasts of all these various things, and you're telling a convincing story to get approval. But when you make the business case, you have to have number 5 on my list, which is you've set up mechanisms to track the actual results and quantify them before you move ahead with your investment. Because if you make the case but you can't track it later, you can't prove your case. So those are the 5 steps that I think are critical for your ability to make a strong business case to the executive suite. And I must tell you that I think the most difficult challenge is separating the customer experience actions from the other causal factors. And frankly, that'll be a topic for our next webinar and publication in this area. I want to give one example of how those elements come together. And I was scanning for publicly available information on this. And honestly, there's a lot of talk about the pieces, but not many people have pulled it all together into what meets my standard as a business case. I did find a publication by some customer experience practitioners at Verizon, and they had a particular program for their retail salespeople. They had hired a company called Rehearsal Practice Platform that provides a certain type of training in addition to the regular training. And what this is they give the salespeople common customer situations and questions, and they ask those salespeople to make a video of their best responses. And they can make multiple takes, if you will, and put their best one together. That is then provided to coaches, who then give feedback in text and video format to the employees, with the option to let the employee learn from that, make an improved submission, have it reviewed, and basically cycle through till both the coach and the employee are satisfied. So that's the program that Verizon measured. And what was important here is that they made this program available but not mandatory. And what that ended up doing was that they found that 515 salespeople used this video role playing 2 or more times. But the people that chose not to do it were in very similar representative salespeople, but they became a control group for somebody that didn't take this customer experience action. So that's how they could get at the causation. All the salespeople had the opportunity to do it, but they could say the people that really took this CX initiatives were a different set. And they could track the results for the individual salespeople, and their key measure was gross adds, which is their term for new customers added. And they found that those who did this video practicing got 71% higher gross adds than those that didn't. And they took the next step, which is they could calculate the revenue, and they found that increased their revenue by $1.39 million over 3 months. Now, from my list, I would say they really should have taken it down to the profit level, but given that a lot of this is digital, it probably was mostly profit anyway. But they took the steps to have a control group, and they took it all the way to the dollar profit benefit. They also, in the second bullet point on the left, they gathered all the relevant costs or the investment for this program. That was completing the effort, including development of the training setup, the attendance costs, the time, the coaches. They put that all together, and they came up with a return on investment of 749%, which is tremendous. That implicitly, they had come up with the one-time costs that I'm saying you need to put together, which is $186,000 to put all this stuff together. So the $186,000 investment created 1.39 or million or 749% return on investment. So my point for you is this is kind of a tangible example of how the story needs to look when you make a strong business case for your CFO or executive management. So to summarize today, I have 4 points for you. First of all, hopefully I've convinced you that you should be concerned about customer experience becoming a fad, and that will motivate you to show the CFO the numbers. I also have described public research studies and how they're sort of interesting and have a role, and it's not that you're not going to do measures, but you need a lot more for a strong business case, and you have to be skeptical about lifting some of those the numbers from those analyses and using them to try to convince your chief financial officer. I've also listed the 5 key elements for a strong business case. You need to have this customer experience actions. You need to talk about causality. You need to calculate incremental profits and one-time dollar investment. And you also had to set up tracking. Final point I'm going to make is that there is clearly an accounting challenge here, and many customer experience practitioners, this is not necessarily in their background, but my my encouragement for you is you really need to overcome that accounting challenge or be undermined by it. So that's my presentation for today, and hope you found it thought-provoking. If you have follow-up questions or would like to discuss how these thoughts might be applied and carried forward at your company, on the screen you see my contact information and the contact information of Gene Carolfi, our Director of Sales Experience, and we'd love to carry on this conversation with you at another time. So that's the end of my formal presentation, and I think this is a point where we can answer some of the questions that have come in today. So Joe, can you tee up some questions for me to answer in the last few minutes here?
Yes, we have a few questions. First one, how should intangible benefits be handled?
Well, the intangible benefits are kind of the soft numbers, and in a business case, you know, they need to be highlighted separately. They should be discussed, but if they can't be put into numbers, honestly, it will most often be given less importance overall. So you really need to put together hard numbers, and then list the soft numbers. That helps build the case. But you're probably not going to get your investment purely on the intangibles.
Another question is, what is the accounting challenge that you referenced at the end?
Well, the accounting challenge is getting all the information that you need to track to make your case and then prove it later with the actual results. And a lot of that comes in isolating the revenue for of customers, say, that have been affected by your CX initiative to compare to revenues of customer sets that have not, getting from revenue down to profit contribution, the accounting for what cost to include, you know, maybe the gross getting on to gross margin and other accounting numbers should be included and not included. So you really need to understand your financial accounts and how things are come together so that you can set up that tracking to make your case.
All right. Another question we have is in your ROI calculation, where do you include CX recurring costs, like closing the loop on customer inquiries?
Okay. Yeah. I mentioned that the investment should be only the one-time cost, and the recurring costs should be included in the net profit, net incremental profit numerator calculation of ROI. Basically, those costs need to be more than offset by the incremental profits that are coming from the customers buying more or having you expend less costs. So they're net out of that incremental profit number that I listed in my key elements.
All right, we do have a lengthier question here. One of the challenges I see is that there are many variables at play, and it is hard to attribute growth solely to a CX initiative. Marketing is going to claim they did something, or sales will claim their new salesperson made the growth. How do you isolate CX improvements when they span functions?
Well, one of the main approaches that I'm going to be discussing in our sort of next publications is this idea of a control group. And before you start your initiative, you need to essentially discover whether there are some other major changes in the way marketing or different organizations are going to do things, and make sure that the customers that you're going to track and measure that are affected by the CX initiatives and the control group are experiencing those same programs. So you're going to have to determine that before you start, and obviously try to track to make sure that something didn't change and you know, one group was affected by something and then somebody else didn't. So it's a careful selection of the test group that you're going to have and the control group you're going to compare it to is classic. There are some other ways that I'm going to describe later. But essentially, in picking the customer groups you use for comparison, those that are affected by CX and those that are not, their demographics, their different different aspects of geography or the mix of products that they buy. You look at as best you can at all these variables and try to make sure that both groups, your test and your other group, are equally affected by those things that are other initiatives that are going on in your company. That said, it's never going to be perfect. Something is going to happen, and you need to be looking out for that, and you'll make your best explanation. But I think if you make an effort to control for those factors and make sure that one of your groups for comparison is not affected when the other is, that will handle this issue and allow you to attribute much more causality to the customer experience activities.
All right, we do have time we probably have 1 more minute left if anyone has questions. Do we need to wait for the next webinar? And has Scott written a book describing this? Or has Scott written a book? So I guess it's...
Well, I have not written a book. I'm coming into this actually from a lot of experience making business cases and justifying strategic investments and those different things. And I was drawn into this challenge for the customer experience industry by Mohammed. So I'm applying my expertise from other areas. But yes, we actually will very soon having the next publication, an article series. That'll be out very soon, and then we'll do a webinar on that topic, hopefully in the not too distant future.
Another question, with regard to the sales training example, I think you stated that the salespeople were allowed to decide for themselves whether or not to take the training. Is that correct?
Yes.
And if so, do you have any concerns about allowing subjects to self-select?
Well, that too could be a bit of the issue. Some of your most engaged salespeople might be the ones that are willing to work harder and do more. So you in fairness, might want to say that they self-selected, therefore they might be inherently better salespeople than the other folks. But in general, the self-selection, it doesn't have to be a bad thing. I can see circumstances where you do have to be careful about that. But honestly, one way to adjust for that is to look at the salespeople that volunteered and look at their previous history of gross ads, of adding new customers, and see if it was any different than the people that didn't take this new training set. And as long as it wasn't different, that would be pretty good proof that the self-selection didn't bias the results in any way. I don't know if Verizon did that or not. But again, once you're thinking this way about causality and making your point, you can often find ways to analyze that and see if it really has an effect.
Another question, when do you anticipate the next webinar, and how do we get the materials that you mentioned?
The next webinar will probably be in about a month, and the materials are going to be posted, the article on the website probably in the next couple of days.
Okay, I think that might be all questions we have. If there's no other questions,
let me just say thank you to everybody for attending the webinar. Again, I hope you found it stimulating, and we'd love to open the discussion with you about your own company. If you're interested at any time, please just do contact us. Have a good day.